Continuing Pudd'nhead Wilson by Mark Twain. No, no. Take it away. His breast was rising and falling, and he moved his head about in a dull and wandering way, like a person who had been stunned. Presently he said, "I shall feel better when I get to bed. I have been wrought today, and yes, overworked for many days." Then I'll leave you and let you be to your rest. Good night, old man. But as Tom went out, he could deny himself a small parting guide. Don't take it so hard. A body can't win every time. You'll hang somebody yet, Wilson muttered to himself. It's no lie to say, I am sorry. I have to begin with you, miserable dog though you are. He braced himself up with a glass of cold whiskey and went to work again. He did not compare the new finger marks unintentionally left by Tom a few minutes before on Roxy's glass with the tracings of the marks left on the knife handle, there being no need of that for his trained eye, but busied himself with another matter, muttering from time to time, "Idiot that I was! Nothing but a girl would do me. A man in girl's clothes never occurred to me." First, he hunted out the plate containing the fingerprints made by Tom when he was 12 years old and laid it by itself. Then he brought forth the marks made by Tom's baby fingers when he was a suckling of 7 months and placed these two plates with the one containing the subject's new and unconsciously made record. Now the series is complete, he said, with satisfaction, and sat down to inspect those things and enjoy them, but his enjoyment was brief, and stared a considerable time at the 3 strips, and seemed stupefied with astonishment. At last he put them down and said, I can't make it out at all, and hang it, the babies don't tally with the others. He walked the floor for half an hour, puzzling over his enigma. Then he hunted out the 2 other glass plates. He sat down and puzzled over these things a good while, but kept muttering, "It's no use. I can't understand it. They don't tally right, and yet I'll swear the names and dates are right, and so, of course, they ought to tally. I never labeled one of these things carelessly in my life. There's a most extraordinary mystery here." He was tired out now, and his brains were beginning to clog, he said, and he would sleep himself fresh, and then see what he could do with this riddle, and then slept through a troubled and restful hour, then unconsciously began to shred away, and presently he rose drowsily to a sitting posture. Now, what was that dream, he said, trying to recall it. What was that dream? It seemed to unravel that puzzle. He landed in the middle of the floor at a bound without finishing the sentence, and ran and turned up his lights and seized his records. He took a single swift glance at them and cried out, "It's so! Heavens, what a revelation!" And for 23 years no man has ever suspected it. Chapter 21. Doom. He's useless on top of ground. He ought to be under it, inspiring the cabbages. Pudd'nhead Wilson's calendar. April 1st. This is the day upon which we are reminded of what we are on the other 364. Pudd'nhead Wilson's calendar. Wilson put on enough clothes for business purposes and went to work under a high pressure of steam. He was awake all over. All sense of weariness had been swept away by the invigorating refreshment of the great and hopeful discovery which he had made. He made fine and accurate reproductions, a number of his records, and then enlarged them on a scale of 10 to 1 with his pantograph. He did these pantograph enlargements on sheets of white cardboard and made each individual line of the bewildering maze of whorls or curves or loops which constituted the pattern of a record stand out, bold and black, by reinforcing it with ink. To the untrained eye, the collection of delicate originals made by the human finger on the glass plates looked about alike, but when enlarged 10 times, they resembled the markings of a block of wood that has been sawed across the grain, and the dullest eye could detect at a glance, and at a distance of many feet, that no two of the patterns were alike. When Wilson had at last finished his tedious and difficult work, he arranged its results according to a plan in which a progressive order and sequence was a principal feature. Then he added to the batch several pentagraph enlargements, which he had made from time to time in bygone years. The night was spent, and the day was advanced now. By the time he had snatched a trifle of breakfast, it was 9 o'clock, and the court was ready to begin its sitting. He was in its place 12 minutes later with his records. Tom Driscoll caught a slight glimpse of the records and nudged his nearest friend and said with a wink, "Pudd'nhead's got a rare eye to business. Thinks that as long as he can't win his case, it's at least a noble good chance to advertise his palace window decorations without any expense." Wilson was informed that his witness had been delayed, but would arrive presently. But he rose and said he should probably not have occasion to make use of their testimony. An amused murmur ran through the room. "It's a clean back down. He gives up without hitting a lick." Wilson continued, "I have other testimony and better." This compelled interest and evoked murmurs of surprise that had a delectable ingredient of disappointment in them. "If I seem to be springing the evidence upon the court, I offer as my justification for this that I did not discover its existence until late last night, and have been engaged in examining and classifying it ever since. Until half an hour ago, I shall offer it presently. But first, I wish to say a few preliminary words. May it please the court, the claim given at the front place, the claim most persistently urged, the claim most strenuously, and I may even say aggressively and defiantly insisted upon by the prosecution, is in this, that the person whose hand left the blood-stained fingerprints upon the handle of the Indian knife is the person who committed the murder." Wilson paused during several moments to give impressiveness to what he was about to say. Then he added tranquilly, "We grant that claim." It was an electric surprise. No one was prepared for such an admission. A buzz of astonishment rose on all sides, and people were heard to intimate that the overworked lawyer had lost his mind. Even the veteran judge, accustomed as he was to legal ambushes and masked batteries in criminal procedure, was not sure that his ears were not deceiving him, and asked counsel what it was he had said. Howard's impassive face betrayed no sign, but his attitude and bearing lost something of their careless confidence for a moment. Wilson resumed, "We not only grant that claim, but we welcome it and strongly endorse it. Leaving that matter for the present, we will now proceed to consider other points in the case which we propose to establish by evidence, and shall include that one in the chain in its proper place." He had made up his mind to try a few hardy guesses, and mapping out his theory of the origin and motive of the murder. Guesses designed to fill up gaps in it, guesses which could help if they hit, and would probably do no harm if they didn't. To my mind, certain circumstances of the case before the court seem to suggest a motive for the homicide quite different from the one insisted on by the state. It is my conviction that the motive was not revenge, but robbery. It has been urged that the presence of the accused brothers in that fatal room just after notification that one of them must take the life of Judge Driscoll or lose his own the moment the parties should meet clearly signifies that the natural instinct of self-preservation moved my clients to go there secretly and save Count Luigi by destroying his adversary. Then, why did they stay there after the deed was done? Mrs. Pratt had time, although she did not hear the cry for help, but woke up some moments later to run to that room, and there she found these men standing and making no effort to escape. If they were guilty, they ought to have been running out of the house at the same time that she was running to that room. If they had such a strong instinct towards self-preservation as to move them to kill that unarmed man, what had become of it now, when it should have been more alert than ever? Would any of us have remained there? Let us not slander our intelligence to that degree. Much stress has been laid upon the fact that the accused offered a very large reward for the knife with which this murder was done, that no thief came forward to claim that extraordinary reward, that the latter fact was good circumstantial evidence that the claim that the knife had been stolen was a vanity and a fraud, but that these details, taken in connection with the memorable and apparently prophetic speech of the deceased concerning the knife, and the final discovery of that very knife in the fatal room where no living person was found present with the slaughtered man, but the owner of the knife and his brother, form an indestructible chain of evidence which fixes the crime upon those unfortunate strangers. But I shall presently ask to be sworn, and I shall testify that there was a large reward offered for the thief also, that it was offered secretly and not advertised, that this fact was indiscreetly mentioned, or at least tactically admitted in what was supposed to be safe circumstances, but may not have been. The thief may have been present himself. Tom Driscoll had been looking at the speaker, but dropped his eyes at this point. In that case, he would have retained the knife in his possession, not daring to offer it for sale or for pledge in a pawn shop. There was a nodding of heads among the audience by way of admission that this was not a bad stroke. I shall prove to the satisfaction of the jury that there was a person in Judge Driscoll's room several minutes before the accused entered it. This produced a strong sensation. The last drowsy head in the courtroom roused up now and made preparation to listen. If it shall seem necessary, I will prove by Mrs. Clarkson that they met a veiled person, ostensibly a woman, coming out of the back gate a few minutes after the cry for help was heard. This person was not a woman, but a man dressed in woman's clothes. Another sensation. Wilson had his eye on Tom when he hazarded this guess to see what effect it would produce. He was satisfied with the results. He said to himself, "It was a success. He's hit. The object of that person in the house was robbery, not murder. It is true that the safe was not open, but there was an ordinary tin cash box on the table with $3,000 in it. It is easily supposable that the thief was concealed in the house, that he knew of this box and of its owner's habit of counting its contents and arranging his accounts at night. If he had that habit, which I do not assert, of course, that he tried to take the box while its owner slept, but made a noise and was seized, and had to use the knife to save himself from capture, and that he fled without his booty because he heard help coming. I have now done with my theory, and will proceed to the evidences by which I propose to try to prove its soundness." Wilson took up several of his strips of glass. When the audience recognized these familiar mementos of Pudd'nhead's old-time childish puttering and folly, the tense and funereal interest vanished out of their faces, and the house burst into volleys of relieving and refreshing laughter, and Tom chirped and joined the fun himself. But Wilson was apparently not disturbed. He arranged his records on the table before him and said, "I beg the indulgence of the court while I make a few remarks in explanation of some evidence which I am about to introduce." And which I shall presently ask to be allowed to verify under oath on the witness stand. Every human being carries with him from his cradle to his grave certain physical marks which do not change their character, and by which he can always be identified, and that without shade of doubt or question. Those marks are his signature, his physiological autograph, so to speak. And his autograph cannot be counterfeited, nor can he disguise it or hide it away, nor can it become illegible by the wear and mutations of time. This signature is not his face. Age can change that beyond recognition. It is not his hair, for that can fall out. It is not his height, for the duplicates of that exist. It is not his form, for duplicates of that exist also. Whereas this signature is each man's very own. There is no duplicate of it among the swarming populations of the globe. The audience were interested once more. The autograph consists of the delicate lines, or corrugations, with which nature marks the inside of the hands and the soles of the feet. If you will look at the balls of your fingers, you will have the very sharp eyesight. You will observe that these dainty curving lines lie close to together, like those that indicate the borders of oceans and maps, and that they form various clearly defined patterns such as arches, circles, long curves, whorls, etc., and that these patterns differ on the different fingers. Every man in the room had his hand up to the light now, and now his head canted to one side, and was minutely scrutinizing the balls of his fingers. There were whispered ejaculations of, "Why, it's so, I never noticed that before. The patterns on the right hand are not the same as those on the left." Ejaculations of, "Why, that's so too. Taken finger for finger, your patterns differ from your neighbors." Comparisons were made all over the house. Even the judge and jury were absorbed in this curious work. The patterns of a twin's right hand are not the same as those on his left. One twin's patterns are never the same as his fellow twin's patterns. The jury will find that the patterns upon the finger balls of the accused follow this rule. An examination of the twins' hands was begun at once. You have so often heard of twins who were so alike that, when dressed alike, their own parents could not tell them apart. Yet there never was a twin born into this world that did not carry from his birth to death a sure identifier in this mysterious and marvelous natal autograph. That once known to you, his fellow twin could never personate him and deceive you. Wilson stopped and stood silent. Inattention dies a quick and sure death when a speaker does that. The stillness gives a warning that sometimes is coming. All palms and finger balls went down now. All slouching forms straightened, all heads came up, all eyes were fastened upon Wilson's face. He waited yet 1, 2, 3 moments to let his pause complete and perfect its spell upon the house. Then, when through the profound hush he could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, he put out his hand and took the Indian knife by the blade and held it aloft where all could see the sinister spots on its ivory handle. Then he said in a level and passionless voice, "Upon this haft stands the assassin's natal autograph, written in the blood of that helpless and unoffending old man who loved you and whom you all loved. There is but one man in this whole earth whose hand can duplicate that crimson sign." He paused and raised his eye to the pendulum swinging back and forth. "And please God, we will produce that man in this room before the clock strikes noon." Stunned, distraught, unconscious of its own movement, the house half rose, as if expecting to see the murderer appear at the door, and a breeze of muttered ejaculations. Yeah, nowadays we wouldn't say that, but the blurtings out swept the place, ordering the court sit down. This from the sheriff. He was obeyed and quite resigned again. Wilson stole a glance at Tom and said to himself, "He is flying signals of distress now. Even people who despise him are pitying him. They think this is a hard ordeal for a young fellow who has lost his benefactor by so cruel a stroke." And they are right. He resumed his speech. "For more than 20 years I have amused my compulsory leisure with collecting these curious physical signatures in this town. At my house I have hundreds upon hundreds of them. Each and every one is labeled with name and date, not labeled the next day or even the next hour, but in the very minute that the impression was taken. When I go upon the witness stand, I will repeat under oath the things which I am now saying. I have the fingerprints of the court, the sheriff, every member of the jury. There is hardly a person in this room, white or black, whose natal signature I cannot produce, and not one of them can so disguise himself that I cannot pick him out from a multitude of his fellow creatures, and unerringly identify him by his hands. And if he and I should live to be 100, I could still do it." The interest of the audience was steadily deepening now. "I have studied some of the signatures so much that I know them as well as the bank cashier knows the autograph of his oldest customer. While I turn my back now, I beg that several persons will be so good as to pass their fingers through their hair and then press them upon one of the panes of the window near the jury, and that among them the accused may set their finger marks. Also, I beg that these experimenters or others will set their finger marks upon another pane and add again the marks of the accused, but not placing them in the same order or relation to the other signatures as before, for by one chance in a million a person might happen upon the right marks by pure guesswork once, Therefore I wish to be tested twice. He turned his back, and the 2 panes were quickly covered with delicately lined oval spots, but visible only to such persons as could get a dark background for them. The foliage of a tree outside, for instance. Then, upon call, Wilson went to the window and made his examination. Said, This is Count Luigi's right hand. This one 3 signatures below is his left. Here is Count Angelo's right. Down here is his left. As for the other pane, here and here are Count Luigi's. Here and here are his brothers. He faced about. Am I right? A deafening explosion of the applause was answered. The bench said, This certainly approaches the miraculous. Wilson turned to the window again and remarked, pointing with his finger, This is the signature of Mr. Justice Robinson. Applause. This is of Constable Blake. Applause. This is of John Mason, juryman. Applause. This is of the sheriff. Applause. I cannot name the others, but I have them all at home, named and dated, and could identify them all by my fingerprint records. He moved to his place through a storm of applause, which the sheriff stopped, and also made the people sit down, for they were all standing and struggling to see, of course. Court, jury, sheriff, and everybody have been too absorbed in observing Wilson's performance to attend the audience earlier. Now then, said Wilson, I have here the natal autographs of 2 children, thrown up to 10 times the natural size by the pantograph, so that anyone who can see at all can tell the markings apart at a glance. We will call the children A and B. Here are A's finger marks, taken at the age of 5 months. Here they are again, taken at 7 months. Tom started. They are alike, you see. Here B at 5 months, and also at 7 months. They, too, exactly copy each other, but the patterns are quite different from A's, you observe. I shall refer to these again presently, but we will turn them face down now. Here thrown up to 10 sizes are the natal autographs of the 2 persons who were here before you accused of murdering Judge Driscoll. I made these pantographic copies last night, and will so swear when I go upon the witness stand. I asked the jury to compare them with the finger marks of the accused upon the window panes, and tell the court if they are the same. He passed a powerful magnifying glass to the foreman. One juryman after another took the cardboard and the glass and made the comparison. Then the foreman said to the judge, Your Honor, we are agreed that they are identical. Wilson said to the foreman, Please turn to that cardboard face down and take this one and compare it searchingly by the magnifier with the fatal signature upon the knife handle, and report your findings to the court. Again the jury made minute examinations and again reported, We find them to be exactly identical, Your Honor. Wilson turned towards the counsel for prosecution, and there was clearly a recognizable note of warning in his voice when he said, May it please the court, the state has claimed strenuously and persistently that the blood-stained fingerprints upon that knife handle were left there by the assassin of Judge Driscoll. You have heard us grant that claim and welcome it. He turned to the jury, compare the fingerprints of the accused with the fingerprints of the left by the assassin, and report. The comparison began, and as it proceeded, all movement and all sound ceased, and the deep silence of an absorbed and waiting suspense settled upon the house. And when at last the words came, They do not even resemble. A thunderclash of applause followed, and the house sprang to its feet, but quickly repressed by official force and brought to order again. Tom was altering his position every few minutes now, but none of his changes brought repose or any small trifle of comfort. When the house's attention was become fixed once more, Wilson said gravely, indicating the twins with a gesture, These men are innocent. I have no further concern with them. Another outbreak of applause began, but was promptly checked. We will now proceed to find the guilty. Tom's eyes were starting from their sockets. Yes, it was a cruel day for the bereaved youth, everybody thought. We will return to the infant autographs of A and B. I will ask the jury to take these large pantograph facsimiles of A's, marked 5 months and 7 months. Do they tally? The foreman responded, Perfectly. Now examine this pantograph taken at 8 months. Also marked A. Does it tally with the other 2? The surprised response was no. They differ widely. You're quite right. Now take these 2 pantographs of B's autographed, marked 5 months and even 7 months. Do they tally with each other? Yes, perfectly. Take this 3rd pantograph marked B, 8 months. Does it tally with B's other 2? By no means. Do you know how to account for these strange discrepancies? I will tell you. For a purpose unknown to us, but probably a selfish one, somebody changed those children in the cradle. This produced a vast sensation, naturally. Roxana was astonished at this admirable guess, but not disturbed by it. To guess the exchange was one thing. To guess who did it, quite another. Pudd'nhead Wilson could do wonderful things, no doubt, but he couldn't do impossible ones. Safe? She was perfectly safe, she smiled privately. Between the ages of 7 months and 8 months, those children were changed in the cradle. He made one of his effect-cooling pauses and added, and the person who did it is in this house. Roxy's pulses stood still. The house was thrilled as with an electric shock, and these people half rose to seek a glimpse of the person who had made that exchange. Tom was growing limp. The life seemed oozing out of him. Wilson resumed. A was put into B's cradle in the nursery. B was transferred to the kitchen and became a Negro and a slave. This nonsense that if you're part black, you're Negro. But, sensation, confusion of anger bursting out. But within a quarter of an hour, he will stand before you, white and free. But burst of applause checked by the officers. From 7 months onward till now, A has still been a usurper, and in my finger record he bears B's name. Here is his pantograph at the age of 12. Compare it with the assassin's signature upon the knife handle. Do they tally? The foreman answered. To the minutest detail, Wilson said solemnly. The murderer of your friend and mine, your Driscoll, of the generous hand and the kindly spirit, sits in among you. Valet de chamber, Negro and slave, falsely called Thomas A. Becket Driscoll. Make upon the window the fingerprints that will hang you. Tom turned his ashen face imploring toward the speaker, made some impotent movement with his white lips, and then slid, limp and lifeless, to the floor. Wilson broke the odd silence with the words, "There is no need, he has confessed." Roxy flung herself upon her knees, covered her face with her hands, and out through her sobs the words struggled. "The Lord have mercy on me, po' miserable sinner that I is." The clock struck 12, the court rose, the new prisoner, handcuffed, was removed. And conclusion. It is often the case that the man who can't tell a lie thinks he is the best judge of one. Pudd'nhead Wilson's calendar. October 12th. Aleister Crowley's birthday, but the discovery. It was wonderful to find America. But it would have, or was it his death day? But it would have been more wonderful to miss it. Pudd'nhead Wilson's calendar. The town set up all night to discuss the amazing events of the day and swap guesses as to when Tom's trial would begin. Troop after troop of citizens came to serenade Wilson, at require his speech, and shout themselves hoarse over every sentence that fell from his lips. For all his sentences were golden. Now all were marvelous. His long fight against hard luck and prejudice was ended. He was a made man for good, and as each of those roaring gangs of enthusiasts marched away, some remorseful member of it was quite sure to raise his voice and say, "And this is the man the likes of us have called a Pudd'nhead for more than 20 years. He has resigned from that position, friends. Yes, but it isn't vacant. We're elected." The twins were heroes of romance now, and with rehabilitated reputations, but they were weary of Western adventure and straightway retired to Europe. Roxy's heart was broken. The young fellow upon whom she had inflicted 23 years of slavery continued the false heir's pension of $35 a month to her. But her hurts were too deep for money to heal, and the spirit in her eye was quenched. Her martial bearing departed with it, and the voice of her laughter ceased in the land. In her church and its affair she found her only solace. The real heir suddenly found himself rich and free, but in a most embarrassing situation. He could neither read nor write, and his speech was the basest dialect of the Negro quarter. His gait, his attitudes, his gestures, his bearing, his laugh, all were vulgar and uncouth. His manners were the manners of a slave. Money and fine clothes could not mend these defects or cover them up, and they only made them the more glaring and the more pathetic. The poor fellow could not endure the terrors of the white man's parlor, and felt at home and at peace nowhere but in the kitchen. The family pew was a misery to him, yet he could never more enter into the solacing refuge of the Negro gallery that was closed to him for good and all. But we cannot follow his curious fate further. That would be a long story. The false heir made a full confession and was sentenced to imprisonment for life. But now complication came up. The Percy Driscoll estate was in such a crippled shape when its owner died that it could pay only 60% of its great indebtedness, and was settled at that rate. But the creditors came forward now and complained that inasmuch as through an error for which they were in no way to blame, for the false heir was not inventoried at that time with the rest of the property, no great wrong and loss had thereby been inflicted upon them. They rightly claimed that Tom was lawfully their property and had been so for 8 years, and that they had already lost sufficiently in being deprived of his services during that long period, and ought not to be required to add anything to that loss. If he had been delivered up to them in the first place, they would have sold him, and he could not have murdered Judge Driscoll. Therefore, it was not he that had really committed the murder. The guilt lay with the erroneous inventory. Everybody saw that there was a reason in this. Everybody granted that if Tom were white and free, it would be unquestionably right to punish him. It would be no loss to anybody, but to shut up a valuable slave for life, that was quite another matter. As soon as the governor understood the case, he pardoned Tom at once, and the creditors sold him down the river. Now, one of the things, though, got some offenses, the slave and the free, sort of should have the same punishment, right? Other offenses are sort of partly excused because they're not free. But prison is really about slavery anyways, isn't it?